Crocodile leather is the hide of a crocodile tanned into a usable material for leather working. It has a really unique pattern, a soft texture, and great durability. However, its limited production makes it highly sought after and considered a luxury and exotic leather. As a result, hides can cost anywhere between $250 and $1,500, sometimes even more or less, depending upon their size and grade. What makes it special is the unique texture and durability of the scales on top of crocodile hide. It makes a really popular choice for luxury products like bags, wallets, shoes, and belts. And the distinctive scale pattern makes it a unique visual texture, as well as the variation of that scale pattern, so it can create some pretty unique leather items. Crocodile leather has been around since before the 1800s. However, prior to then, the skins were usually stiff and flaky, and as a result, had relatively limited use. It wasn't until the 1850s when the chromium tanning processes were improved, and that really made some crocodile hides that were then more durable, a little more flexible, and a little more usable alike. This is a fun part. Let's check out the top of a close-up view of this material. So when we look here, we can really start to see kind of the peaks and valleys and the texture and that unique look to crocodile leather. Right here, we could see a couple of those scales and how they kind of rest next to each other. The peaks somewhat in the middle, and then we have the valleys as it fades out. And even between them, there is definitely a relatively hard texture between those scales as well. And so this is what kind of will reflect on the final product, looking up close. And so it gives it a very special kind of unique look and feel. Looking on the bottom, we have a relatively dense fiber pattern, and we could see those give you a good smooth base of material underneath the scalier top section. And so as a leather, it's pretty durable, and you could see here there's a very dense fiber pattern. And so when cared for well, something like this will usually last a long time. And a fun one is the section view. So looking here, we could see it's going to be a little bit different than your typical, bovine leather or something like that, where we don't have necessarily as thick a material, although we do see a similar striation of the fibers. So we could notice here, they're going to be a little larger, a little wider. And then when we get closer to the top, they're going to get a little closer together, a little bit denser, and then we see that top scale section here. And even though it may seem to be a lot thicker from the outside, looking in the section view, it's still a relatively thin top layer there. What gives it the benefits is that it's relatively durable, and that's why even though it is thin, it's pretty strong. Because of the relative rarity of these hides, they're usually produced in just a few locations around the world. Overall per year, we see around 750,000 crocodile hides produced, which is less than 1% of the total leather hides produced annually. Most often, we see it produced in areas that have more native crocodile populations, such as Africa, Southeast Asia, and Australia, with a lot being present in Thailand. The biggest exporting countries include Thailand, India, and Vietnam. And the biggest importing countries also include India, Vietnam, and Italy. When looking at cost, there's a wide variation in crocodile hides due mainly to quality and size. Smaller and lower quality is less expensive. Obviously, larger and higher quality is more expensive. So we could see prices for an entire hide ranging generally between $250 and $1,500 United States dollars. And more often than not, hides are generally sold as whole. Sometimes a half hide would be available. But unique to this leather versus other types, you really don't get, the square foot kind of measurements or smaller cut-off pieces. Usually you're getting a large part of or mostly a whole hide. Looking at the pros, we have a couple of really interesting ones here. Primary is the attraction to its pattern. It has a very unique visual look, a very unique visual feel, and that creates a unique finished product. So the scale pattern of the crocodile leather is definitely a pro in that aspect. And also they're unique. No two skins are ever the same. Anything made from a crocodile leather is going to be beyond its visual look. It's going to be physically unique as well, which is pretty cool. And lastly, crocodile leather is also relatively durable. Given that it's made with those scaly texture on the outside, those also provide protection for that whatever leather goods that material is used to make. Looking at a few cons, it is a relatively expensive exotic leather, so it may not be something for everyday projects or something that you maybe want to have an idea in mind for, to know to use this material for it. Additionally, if you do want to craft with it, it's good to practice with smaller pieces or scraps if you can get them, because there will be some unique ways to work with it. Also, it is not as waterproof as you may think. There is some water resistance, but it is not totally waterproof. And then a small minor con is when working with it, the scales aren't always consistent, and so you have to factor in the orientation of those scales into the finished product, which takes a little more effort to do. Good uses for crocodile leather include making wallets, some shoes, boots, handbags, sectioned belts, and inlays and watch straps. So generally smaller items, although they can be crafted in a number of unique ways where crocodile leather can either be the main material or it can be the accent material used in part of a larger project. Here are a few tips for working with crocodile leather. First, plan projects around the scale size and orientation for a cohesive design. Since it is a natural material and the scales vary based on the different hides, it's important to really plan around that unique hide, both in terms of scale, how big or small they are, and in terms of orientation, where you plan to make your cuts. Also, avoid directly cutting through a scale if possible, since that will create a relatively unique or unfinished edge to it. Where you can, kind of cut with the scale so it remains with that original look and feel to the edge. When cutting, cut from the back side of the material, because when using the knife on the top, the scales may kind of induce the knife to jump the track a little bit, and so it won't be a perfectly straight cut. And so one trick is to cut from the bottom of the leather, where it's going to be a little smoother and more consistent, and that will help keep a straight and even cutting line. And then, depending on the size of the material, you may want to lightly stretch the skin a little bit to better see the holes that are between the scales. That may give you some more insight into what area of the material to use, or how it may look and feel when it's actually being worn on the final product, if it's a product that will involve kind of movement and stretching. So there you have it, a unique leather with some pretty special properties. And if you're looking to use this maybe for a project or just understand a little more about how to craft with it, the best thing would be is to give it a try and kind of get your hands on it and really see, feel, and touch how that leather feels when you're working with it. Once you get a hang of it, it can make some really special things that can last a very long time, and it's definitely worth checking out if you think it would be something great for your next project.